The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Wow, Mike Pence is going on the road in a big way. This from Politico. This weekend, he'll head to Pittsburgh for an event for Rick Saccone, a Republican running in a tight special election. Includes a February 16 stop in San Antonio for Will Hurd. The lawmaker represents the Texas-Mexico border. On February 21, he'll be in Naples, Florida for an NRCC event. In March alone, Pence plans to be in the Detroit area for the NRCC, Kentucky for Representative Andy Barr, Missouri for Josh Hawley's Senate bid, Ohio for Reps Steve Stivers, the chairman of the NRCC, New York for the NRCC, Minnesota, Iowa, and Pennsylvania. In April, he heads to North Carolina for Mark Walker, Omaha for Representative Don Bacon, and Nevada for Dean Heller, and Indiana for the NRSC. Now, the take in a lot of kind of pundit circles, well, in fact, this is the headline over at Daily Kos, Mike Pence's big plan for Republican victory in 2018 is Mike Pence everywhere, Donald Trump nowhere. You know, that may be the case. I think, though, that Mike Pence is thinking, you know, I might just be president a year from now, and I need to start establishing my bona fides. I need to start establishing good connections with all these people on the ground, make them loyal to me rather than Donald Trump, and, you know, set things up. What do you think? And which raises the question, if Trump goes and Pence comes in, is Pence going to continue the strongman routine of the Trump administration and the strongman praise? Declan Walsh wrote a fascinating piece in today's New York Times, the headline, As Strongmen Steamroll Their Opponents, U.S. is Silent. And he started talking about el-Sisi, the president of Egypt, and how he has basically marginalized, imprisoned, or threatened to imprison everybody who presented a serious challenge to his presidency. The elections are coming up in a month or so. And so basically he's running against a bunch of obscure politicians nobody ever heard of and who can't campaign and don't have any money. So he's going to win, right? And Donald Trump hails this guy, you know, the el-Sisi, as a fantastic guy. Declan Walsh notes in today's Times, across the world, autocratic leaders are engaging in increasingly brazen behavior, rigging votes, muzzling the press, and persecuting opponents, as they dispense with even a fig leaf of democratic practice once offered to placate the United States or gain international legitimacy. That sounds pretty bad, right? rigging votes, muzzling the press, and persecuting opponents, until you think that, hey, wait a minute, the vote is completely rigged in the United States. You've got this massive gerrymandering so that you get states like Pennsylvania that send almost twice as many Republicans to Congress as they do Democrats, yet Democrats very often win the state, right? Get more votes anyway, but they don't get more congressmen. And it's not just Pennsylvania, it's all across the United States. So, the vote is rigged that way. We've got electronic voting machines, but most importantly, you've got massive voter suppression across the United States. You've got an effort that was running out of the White House with Chris Kobach of Kansas, aggressively removing people from the voting rolls. Millions of people all across the United States, particularly people of color. And young people and elderly people. I mean, they do not want young people to vote because young people know that every other developed country in the world provides free college education to their young people. And, we could do that. They don't want old people to vote, retired people, people over 65, because they know that people over 65 are, shall we say, fond of Social Security and Medicare and don't want to see it privatized and turned over to Bank of America and United Healthcare, respectively. So they're suppressing the vote. I mean, these are the things that these guys are doing. They suppress the vote, they muzzle the press, and they persecute their opponents. So suppressing the vote, check it off. The Republicans are totally on board with this. I mean, massively on board with this. One of the states, I think it was Pennsylvania, one of the states whose Supreme Court, I'm sorry, I don't have that story in front of me. I wrote it a couple days ago. The courts ordered them to redraw their congressional maps, and the leader of the House or Senate of that state said, nah, we're not going to do it. Yeah, good luck. This is, typically what's called a constitutional crisis. Anyhow, in the New York Times, this article about all these authoritarians, the first thing they said they do is rig the votes. I mentioned that. The second thing is muzzling the press. What's the most effective way to muzzle the press? Start calling them fake news. Hitler called them the Lügenpresse, the lying press. Stalin went after the press. One of the first things he did, shut down what fragments remained after Lenin. Hitler shut down the press in 1934. I mean, it was just boom, that was it. Unless you're compliant, unless you're the German equivalent of Fox News, or the Russian equivalent of Fox, or the Soviet equivalent of Fox News, or whatever it may be. I mean, it's just, forget it. And Donald Trump has also proposed changing our libel laws in the United States so that when the press publishes something that he doesn't like, he can sue them and put them out of business. Sort of like what happened to Gawker. That was where, Gawker ran afoul of a cranky billionaire. In this case, we're talking about press running afoul of a cranky president. And he wants to have, a billionaire actually can sue much more easily, claiming that he has some right to privacy, he's not an elected official, than somebody who has chosen to put themselves in the public light and eye, like Donald Trump did, and become president of the United States. So rigging votes, check it off here in the U.S. I mean, they're talking about Cambodia, India with Modi, El-Sisi in Egypt, the Duterte in the Philippines, I mean, Erdogan in Turkey. All over the world, we've got these authoritarian regimes rising up, and they all do three things consistently. They rig the votes, they shut up the press or discredit the press and attack the press, and they persecute their opponents. They go after their opponents. And it's happening in Russia, too. You see this right across the board. And the persecuting of opponents, Donald Trump doesn't just say, hey, I disagree with Hillary Clinton on this policy. It's like, oh, no, she's crooked Hillary. Or even I disagree with Marco Rubio on policy. No, it's little Marco. And worse than that, I mean, going after people using the mechanisms of government to do so. There's something very, 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 very poisonous going on in Washington, D.C. right now among Republicans. Devin Nunes is the tip of the iceberg, I believe. By the way, we'll get into this, at another point, but weird stuff going on with Devin Nunes in Portugal. It's totally strange. Anyhow, I'll get back to that when I've done a little more research on it. In Cambodia, the New York Times writes today, Declan Walsh writes today for the Times, in Cambodia, Prime Minister Hun Sen led a sweeping crackdown on opponents before elections this summer. Mr. Trump flashed a big thumbs up as he posed for a photo with Mr. Hun Sen, who later praised the American president for what he called Trump's lack of interest in human rights. Right. When your president is popular among dictators, look out. Experts say his warm embrace of hardline leaders like President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines. This is the guy who has, personally killed people, has been responsible for something like 10,000 deaths that we know of in the Philippines so far. They say that Trump's warm embrace of Duterte has only encouraged his worst excesses. Putin, Erdogan, Duterte, Sisi. Last year, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said values like freedom and human dignity, values, quote, create obstacles to advancing American security and economic interests. Right. So if we want to be sure to prop up some oil petro, the Saudis or something, a repressive regime, yeah, we can do that, no problem. We need their oil. Or economic interests, we need to mine their things. As Samantha Power said, brutal thugs are smiling. Human rights are not only U.S. values, they're universal. Trump-Tillerson approach is green light for repression. I mean, even during the Cold War, during the Cold War, we had a few of these, but anyhow, it's a fascinating thing, and I want to get into it a little bit more. Stick around, and we'll be right back about the civil service.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
How is Trump going into his war against civil service? This is amazing, too, after the break. And welcome back. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Hey, Dion, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I hope that Mike Pence isn't taking the Amtrak to Pittsburgh today.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Oh, Mike Pence is not taking a train to Pittsburgh. Why is that?
Yeah, I hope not. My question is regarding that Harley-Davidson and a gas company and Sears are laying off employees and closing down the plant.
Right.
And Harley-Davidson, the reason why they're closing down the plant is because they want to reduce costs. So I'm thinking down the road, they're thinking these tax cuts are going to benefit them more than instead of hiring employees.
Well, the GOP tax scam, the Republican tax scam, actually increases the incentives for outsourcing rather than decreases them by giving offshore companies a lower tax rate than they currently have. So companies that offshore were paying 35%, now they're paying 21%. And, that's nuts. But that's what's going on. And add that to the fact that in the first year of the Trump administration, the United States lost 90,000 manufacturing jobs to offshoring. So that's where we're at. Isn't Trump bringing us a wonderful economy? Somehow,
we can't compete against that. And then reducing costs, if a company does that ahead of time, I think sometimes they do it as a precaution against a coming recession. Like I've seen that kind of pattern before 2008.
Yep, and these guys are reading the tea leaves of the market just like all the rest of us are. Spot on. Dion, thanks for the call and thanks for your note. Jesse in Miami. Hey, Jesse, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Hey, that time period when the world was thought to be flat, and they, had the telescope to see that it wasn't, it's
prior to Copernicus, yeah.
So I was thinking the way we had that belief then, could you equate it to the way we believe in profit now? Because everybody just got a sense that there's nothing wrong with it, the same way we used to assume the world was flat. So,
yeah, you make a good point, Jesse. It's the denial of science, the modern denial of science, and the modern denial of the ravages of capitalism. I mean, it's not even discussed in our media. Capitalism. When was the last time you heard the word capitalism on any corporate media? It just doesn't happen.
That's a problem with media. With your, the way you talked about media being fake. Media is fake to the point where it won't bring up what you just said, the basic concept.
Well, I wouldn't say it's fake, Jesse. Let's not use Donald Trump's memes here. Most of our media is owned by large corporations who just very simply don't appreciate large corporations being outed or exposed or whatever the appropriate word is, criticized for that matter.
Yeah, but when you say, when the last time you heard them mention capitalism? Basically, that's how they survive. So they're not going to really challenge it. But they will challenge a big greedy corporation. And when you talk about fractions, now this is what the real deal is. The fractions between too big to jail and chambers of commerce. So how does that affect democracy?
Yeah, well, I think it's the enemy of democracy, and I'm going to get into that right after the break. So well said, Jesse, and thank you for setting up my next rant. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
The corruption of small d democracy, the corruption of human rights, the corruption of civil rights, the destruction, actually, of civil and human rights, the destruction of the public sphere, the deconstruction of government, or as Steve Bannon famously said, the deconstruction of the administrative state, which in other words is taking apart government. Trump came into office promising to destroy the United States government, or at least Steve Bannon was essentially saying that. We're going to deconstruct the administrative state. Okay, fine, you're going to take apart our government. And Trump is doing it. I mean, look at all the people who haven't been appointed to jobs, and the people who have been appointed to jobs are aggressively doing things like taking apart the EPA, taking apart the CDC. The woman who was running it was investing in tobacco stocks at the same time she was supposed to run the campaign to stop smoking. Maybe she decided to dial back the campaign. Hey, if I could dial back the campaign, I could buy JP or RJR or Laurelard or whatever it is. So there's that. But the bigger issue is the one of privatization. And this is something that really started picking up steam under Ronald Reagan. Reagan fully embraced the idea that any job being done by a government bureaucrat could be done better by a corporate bureaucrat. So let's just replace all the government bureaucrats with corporate bureaucrats, right? And this, by the way, Reagan wasn't the first. Margaret Thatcher started this in 1978 in Great Britain and started outsourcing things, started privatizing, industries that were owned by the government, the rails, for example. Kimiko de Freitas Tumara, writing in the New York Times today, actually yesterday, the headline, Britain was a pioneer in outsourcing services. Now the model is broken. And she starts out telling this story of a nursing home. It's called the Millbrow Care Home. And it had been privatized years ago. And it's run by the second largest runner of a company that runs these giant nursing homes in England, or in Britain. And she tells the story, the residents of the Millbrow Care Home were already frail with old age and illness when they started losing weight at an alarming speed. The reason? They were being neglected. For over a year, they've been deprived of food and drink for hours on end. They were not being given the medication they had been prescribed. There were outbreaks of vomiting and diarrhea, outdated food in the kitchen. No one was in charge of preventing the spread of infections. Managers rarely made an appearance. The company that owns Milbro is Four Seasons Healthcare, Britain's second largest provider. And they're owned by Terra Firma, which is like one of Mitt Romney's companies. It's a private equity group. So they're not interested in caring for old people. They're interested in making a profit. Now, the story that Thatcher and Reagan told us that they got from Milton Friedman in the Chicago School back in the 50s and 60s was that because the marketplace is driven by greed and profit, it is always going to seek to maximize profits, which means reducing prices and costs to the bare minimum. So if you're aggressively reducing prices and costs to the bare minimum, then in theory, you should be able to offer services cheaper than a government agency that is not quite so, fanatically interested in reducing costs, but is more committed to providing high-quality services. That was the theory, that private enterprise, because of the profit motive, would do it better. Now, the rest of us were standing around, by the rest of us, I mean most rational economists from Paul Krugman, on down, were standing around, and Richard Wolff, who will be with us in the next hour of the program, we're standing around saying, hey, wait a minute. You're going to take a for-profit entity that wants to make 10 or 20% off this, plus has to pay the salaries of its CEOs and its marketing people, and it has to produce a dividend to give to its stockholders, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's all this overhead associated with being a for-profit company. That they're going to be able to provide the services cheaper? It's like, Medicare has run for years and years and years on less than 3% of total cost. There's not a health insurance company in the United States right now, for-profit health insurance company in the United States, that is even capable of running on less than 20% of cost. Because they've got to pay the CEOs their multi-million-dollar salaries. They've got to pay all the executives. United Healthcare has over 100 of them who make over $1 million a year, if reports are true. They've got to pay these people and all this stuff, and after all, it's a for-profit business. So now we get to the bottom line here. This is from that New York Times story I was just sharing with you. A report by the government's National Audit Office, this would be the British government, shows that taxpayers are expected to pay nearly $285 billion to private contractors for projects and services over the next 25 years. The agency also found that with changing economics, schools could cost 40% more and hospitals 70% more when undertaken through private financed initiatives rather than through the government. You get that? The British government coming right out and saying, okay, here's our official assessment. If you're going to run a hospital for profit, it's going to cost you 70% more than if the government runs it. And you're probably going to get worse service, given what happened in the UK. And if you're going to run a school for profit, it's going to cost 40% more. Somebody needs to wake up Betsy DeVos. Meanwhile, Donald Trump and Mike Pence are trying to destroy the civil service system. More with that after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with that, and we'll get into your calls and the other news of the day. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Ralph Nader's most recent book, Breaking Through Power. It's Easier Than We Think. This is from the first chapter. It's titled Plutocracy of Maximums, Democracy of Minimums. When I was a student at Princeton University, I learned from my anthropology studies the concentration of power in the hands of a few is common to all cultures, societies, nations, tribes, cities, towns, and villages. Even where the thirst for self-governance and democracy is strong, as was the case in New England towns before the American Revolution against King George III, wealthy Tories were there too. In central and western Massachusetts, the farmers used the term the river gods to describe the rich merchants using the Connecticut River as a possible profitable trading route. These days, most people protesting for economic justice use the term the 1% to describe the ultra-small group of people who wield enormous influence over our society today. There is something about the differences in skill, determination, lineage, avarice, and pure luck that stratifies most people from the rulers who dominate them. In the political realm, the few become dominant because they hoard wealth and are driven to exercise power over others. When a small group rules a society, the political system is considered an oligarchy. And when only money and wealth determine how a society is controlled, the political system is a plutocracy. From the standpoint of a democratic society, both oligarchy and plutocracy are inherently unjust and corrupt. Of course, there are variations in the degrees of authoritarianism and cruelty that each system exercises over the communities it relies on for workers and wealth. Scholars have resorted to using phrases like benign dictatorship or wise rules or paternalistic hierarchies to describe lighter touches by those few who impose their rule over the many. Thomas Paine simply called them tyrannies. People, families, and communities can only take so much abuse before they rise up to resist. The job of the rulers is always to find that line and provide the lowest level of pay, security, housing, consumer protection, healthcare, and political access for society so that they can extract and hoard the greatest amount of wealth, power, and immunity from justice for themselves. In many ways, the majority of Americans live in a democracy of minimums, while the privileged few enjoy a plutocracy of maximums. This small volume is not just about the ravages of power or the assaults against disadvantaged and downtrodden communities. The subject here is the dominating influence of the 1% in business, politics, health, education, and society as a whole. Over the past 50 years, Americans have suffered the relentless commercialization of everyday life, their privacy and their childhoods, their parks and prisons, their public budgets and foreign policy, their schools and religious institutions, their elections and governments, and the most basic societal institutions of them all, the family. Consider all the family functions that have been outsourced to business. Eating, cleaning, childcare, counseling, therapy, entertainment, sports, lawn work, simple repairs have been increasingly commercialized, commodified, packaged, and marketed back to us as products of luxury and convenience. Even mother's breast milk has been displaced by infant formula. In a plutocracy, commercialism dominates far beyond the realm of economics and business. Everything is for sale, and money is power. But in an authentic democracy, there must be commercial-free zones where the power of human rights, citizenship, community, equality, and justice are free from the corrupting influence of money. Our elections and our governments should be such commercial-free zones. Our environment, air, and water should never fall under the control of corporations or private owners. Children should not be programmed by a huckstering economy where their vulnerable consciousness becomes the target of relentless corporate marketing and advertising. American history demonstrates that whenever commerce dominates all aspects of national life, a host of ills and atrocities have not just festered and spread, but become normal. Enslavement, land grabs, war, ethnic cleansing, serfdom, child labor, abusive working conditions, corrupt political systems, environmental contamination, and immunity from the law for the privileged few. History also shows that whenever there have been periods when enough of the country organizes and resists, we see movements of people and communities breaking through power. Progress is made, rights are won, education and literacy increase, oppression is diminished. It was in this manner that people of conscience abolished the living nightmare imposed by the laws and whips of white enslavers. The nation moved closer to promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We won more control over our work, our food, our land, our air, and our water. Women secured the right to vote. Civil rights were elevated and enforced. Public schools, improved environments, workplace collective bargaining, and consumer protections did not spontaneously evolve. They were won by people demanding them and breaking through power. These moments of great progress are expressed in terms of new legislation, regulations, and judicial decisions that directly benefit life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book, Breaking Through Power, by Ralph Nader. Breaking Through Power, it's easier than we think.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
back. Our quote for the day is from Carter G. Woodson. He's the author of The Miseducation of the Negro. He is cited as the father of Black History Month, which starts today. Of course, it's the shortest month of the year. So the other 11 months are White History Month, but this gets anyway. His quote is, "Real education means to inspire people to live more abundantly, to learn to live with life as they find it, and to make it better." And we had a poll yesterday on our YouTube channel. Poll your thoughts on the Trump State of the Union. What's your opinion of it? 4% said quite good, actually. 26% said much as expected. 38% said awful, and 31% said, "Why did he waste my time watching it?" Right. So, Mike in Lomita, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Fred. You know that letter you got from
Fred,
Trump?
I love it.
You know, it helped set me back. It's like I'm in a science fiction story, and the time has slipped a groove to 45 years ago.
Right.
Because first they talked about speaking for the silent majority, which was a catchphrase that Nixon used to the hilt. Also, you remember "Bring Us Together"?
Mm-hmm.
Little girl holding up the sign, and Nixon picked that up and used it as a campaign theme. And he then proceeded to bring us together by hiring fake demonstrators to throw rocks at him at a public event. Well, the one thing that really brought people together back then was the Watergate scandal. And there were a number of Republican politicians that, stuck their necks out to try to defend him, and their political careers were flushed down the sewer as a result.
Right.
And it strikes me that clowns like Nunez might be among the damage when this whole thing has settled out.
I predict a year from now, Devin Nunes will either be out of Congress and working for some billionaire-supported think tank or something like, he'll find a place to land, or he'll be facing prosecution from Robert Mueller for obstruction of justice.
Well, you know which one I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I'm guessing that the latter is more likely, Mike. I really am. And but yeah, thank you for the call, and thanks for raising the issue. It's an excellent one. In fact, I have two new emails that I've gotten since the last time I talked to you yesterday. One from Eric Trump and the other from Trump headquarters. The one from Eric Trump says, "Fred, they said my father's presidency would bring down the country, but here we are, 1 year later and stronger than ever. Together, this administration has made real progress for the American people. Unlike obstructionist Democrats who played politics with our military and health care to shut down the government just this month. Fred, if you're standing with us 1 year later and are proud to be on Team Trump, a team of hardworking patriots in all caps, doing their job in Washington, please consider making a crucial January end-of-the-month contribution. Your continued support is the reason we're making America great again each and every day. Thank you, Eric Trump." And then a few hours later, I got this one. This was right after the Trump's State of the Union address. It says, well, actually, it must have been, it was yesterday afternoon, because this came in after I got off the air. Yeah, this arrived here at 4:09 p.m. That Pacific time, so that would be 7 o'clock last night. Dear Fred Flintstone, last night, President Trump reminded us why we joined this movement. He truly loves America and will stop at nothing in all caps, to push our country to a new level of greatness never before witnessed by the world. Remember Hitler's slogan, Ein Reich, ein Führer, ein Welt? One regime, one leader, one world. Anyway, now after last night's first official State of the Union address, the president wants our first FEC report, the Federal Election Commission report, of 2018 to be our strongest yet. In other words, this is the list of how much money they raised. To ensure our report is record-breaking, any contribution you make tonight will be double matched. President Trump thanks you for everything you've done for your country. Please make your contribution of just $35 to $105 before our very first FEC deadline of 28. MAGA! Trump headquarters. Right. Teresa in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Hey, let's get that a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I hear you just fine.
I was remembering a few days ago, I think you had a caller that called in and said how, he doesn't trust the government with his tax money. And you hear this thing say, oh, you know, private business does everything better than the. I got to thinking, you know, to a corporation, to a capitalist corporation, we aren't actually even human. We're either a source of revenue or we're a source of expense.
That's correct.
We have no rights. We have actually no existence as a human being. To our government, we are a person, and we have the Bill of Rights. We have human rights. You know, we are inherently recognized as human beings.
And in fact, we're supposed to be in charge. The first three words of both the Declaration and the Constitution.
Yeah,
we the people.
Exactly. And we can you know, vote them in. We have a vote. We have, you know, like we have the rights. And so it always just, it's so hard for me to hear people saying how much they trust corporations. Corporations don't recognize.
Yeah, your phone is breaking up, Teresa, but in fact, your phone is disintegrated. But I completely agree with you. Very, very well said. Rob in Chico, California. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Conservative from California, first off. You talk about privatization, things that the government does better.
Right.
So, kind of a question. Do you do that? I mean, I'm asking out of curiosity, really. Do you believe that government should, in fact, run all industry?
No.
All commerce?
No, not even remotely.
Well,
no.
let me finish. And secondly, isn't it a reduction of freedom if, in fact, the more the government runs, the less choice you have?
No, it's not. It's not a linear relationship like that. The role of Rob, the problem that you're confronting with this kind of logic is that you're assuming that somehow having more government means less freedom. And I get that. You know, Frank Luntz said that on TV night before last. You know, more regulations, less freedom. But the reality is that there is an appropriate space for government, and there's a wildly inappropriate space for government. I don't want government making my shirt or my shoes or my jeans. I don't want government making my computer or the desk that I'm sitting at. I don't want the government making the camera that I'm talking into. Pardon?
But you would like it to run your airline.
No, I don't want the government to run my airlines either. Here's the deal. Here's how you figure it out, Rob. Let me just lay out my philosophy of this to you, Rob, and then you can, if you can punch holes in it, good luck. Okay, we got about 3 minutes here.
Okay. That's great.
It's very straightforward. There's this thing called the commons. The commons is the stuff that we collectively own. The air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the public spaces, right? Our public roads, our government is part of the commons. Our vote is part of the commons. The commons is the stuff that government should administer because we, the people, should run government. Now, I realize that we, the people, don't so much run government right now. It's mostly the plutocrats because of the Supreme Court 1976 Buckley decision that said billionaires owning politicians is the same thing as free speech. But nonetheless, the philosophy, the idea still maintains. So the first area that government should be participating in is the broad commons, the obvious commons, keeping our rivers and lakes and water supplies,
and our safety, et cetera.
Yeah, I got that. And then the second one is what's called natural monopolies. A natural monopoly is where you, as a consumer, really only have one choice. How many water companies can supply water to your house? How many companies can take sewage out of your house? How many companies can deliver electricity to your house? How many companies can bring the internet to your house? Now, there is a way for the internet, by the way, to not be government run at all. France is doing it right now. And in fact, in France, for 100 MIPS of up and down a month, plus cell phone service, plus about 200 cable channels, you pay around $35 a month. Whereas in the United States, you pay, for that, you would pay over $150 a month. And it's because, well, I'm going off on a tangent. Sorry, Rob. So anyhow, you've got these natural commons and the commons and the natural monopolies. Those are the only areas where government should participate. Period.
As a conservative, I could say I don't disagree with you.
No, that's a conservative position. This is Barry Goldwater would have told you this.
So I'm walking my dogs and a garbage truck is driving by. But the question is just slippery. There are areas that become a question. I just wanted to know, because facts are sort of leaning toward the point that, in fact, government does everything better.
No, I'm not a communist, Rob. I consider myself a democratic socialist. I think that the model that you see in Norway and Sweden and well, most of the northern European countries, even Germany, France, Switzerland, I think that model would work very well for the United States. And it has worked very well for those countries for about a century. And this should be the conversation that we're having right now in our media between our political parties, is what are the appropriate limits of the commons? You know, should the government be administering health care, for example? You know, should we have single-payer health care? And if we agree that we should have single-payer health care, then should the government own the hospitals, or should they simply require that they be not-for-profit? Like pretty much every state in the union required every hospital in every state to be not-for-profit prior to the Reagan administration. And that really helped hold down health care costs. Because we know if you run a hospital on a for-profit basis, or at least Britain tells us, it costs 70% more. So, you know, it's like a rational use of public funds is just a rational thing. Rob, I got to run, but thanks for calling, thanks for being civil, and thanks for provoking an interesting conversation. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM Rock. We'll be back. We're coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. Richard Wolff will be with us in the next hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stick around. We'll be back with more in just a second. And welcome back. Pablo in Chicago. Hey, Pablo, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
How you doing, Tom? Good morning to you.
Back at you.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. I just want to say you're like a breath of fresh air when I listen to you. And reading your book, The Crash of 2016, was a really great way for me to kind of open my head about what's going to be happening in the eventual future here.
Well, thank you, Pablo.
I wanted to talk to you about our debt. You know, right now, currently, student loan debt is $1.5 trillion, credit card debt $1 trillion, auto loan debt $1 trillion, and of course, U.S. consumer debt up to about $13 trillion, I believe.
Yeah, it's in that neighborhood, and I think both the credit card debt, at least the credit card debt, I think is floating around 1.3, 1.4. In any case, yeah, we're trillions of dollars in debt.
Exactly. So I wanted to ask, or maybe you can share with this idea of a debt jubilee that I've been reading recently, and really talk about the advantages and the disadvantages if it's going to be the next thing.
I think that we need to do a debt jubilee for people who are in debt because of medical expenses or because of educational expenses. These are two things that should be paid for by it should be part of the commons. They should be paid for by the government, and in my opinion. And so, you know, the most common cause of bankruptcy right now in the United States is somebody got sick. Getting sick shouldn't wipe you out. We need to make those people whole. And then the most common cause of indebtedness in the United States right now, voluntary indebtedness, let's say problematic indebtedness that keeps people from starting families, that keeps them from getting married, that prevents them from buying a home, that prevents them from starting a business, is student loan debt. And those both, in my opinion, should be wiped out. And we should immediately go to, or as rapidly as possible, a system where college is free and health care is free. I agree with you. And you know, the Jubilee in the Bible is a great example. It's a great metaphor for it.
I'm hoping that will be the case, because I know I myself, at the age of 51, I'm still I have student loan debt that I need still need to pay off.
That's amazing. 51 years old and you still have student loan debt, assuming that it's left over from your 20s, right? Teens and 20s?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. See, this is, you know, I see this, you know, I see it with so many people I know. I see it with my own kids. I mean, it's wow. You know, this should not be. You know, before Ronald Reagan became governor of California, you could go to college in California for absolutely free. In '68, I hitchhiked out there from Michigan and spent the summer in San Francisco. because so many of my friends had moved out there. I mean, half the people I knew at MSU or that I was close to, you know, particularly after all the crackdowns and riots and whatnot at MSU, you know, around the anti-Vietnam War stuff, just said, you know, screw it, I'm going to California to go to school, and because school was free. And then Reagan becomes governor, and that was the end of that. And, you know, it really worked well for California. I think, you know, the free college built their infrastructure. It brought talented, intelligent people to the state and brought out of, you know, out of poverty a lot of people who were capable of doing college, but had been kept down because they just didn't have the money. Their families were poor. So, yeah, we need a debt jubilee, Pablo. I'm totally down with it. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. A couple of things. One, first of all, in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court case, they gave the legislator until February 9th to read all the districts. But if the state legislators refuse to do so by February 9th, the
court's going to do it itself.
Court of Pennsylvania redraws it. So in a lot of ways, actually letting them redraw the districts would be pretty bad. So that's actually a good thing that they wouldn't do that.
Okay. Thanks for that correction, Jared.
Second of all, I find democratic socialism, when you say that Norway and Sweden and Denmark have, you know, developed...
And Germany and France, yeah.
You know, the reason that they have those is due to historic centuries of colonialization and stealing resources from the third world.
Well, that's true of Belgium and France and England, you know, but I don't think that you can say that's true in any consequential degree. You know, Denmark controlled, what, Greenland? And Norway, I don't know what Norway took or Sweden took.
Well, they did have colonies too, but...
I mean, Norway has wealth from oil, and that messes with the equation. So it's kind of hard to say, oh, we should be exactly like Norway, except that we have enormous amounts of oil. They just said this is our oil. This is not ExxonMobil's oil.
Right. But historically speaking, if you look at the economic policies of like the WTO, the IMF, the World Bank, the consensus is that the market must be distorted so that the third world is basically still colonized by the first. And to say that...
That's the neoliberal consensus, Jared. That's not the democratic socialist consensus.
Well, I'm not a democratic socialist per se. I'm a Maoist third worldist. So I've accepted that democratic socialism cannot work because the only way you can achieve democratic socialism is by having a third world to exploit per se. And
so
I
why
don't
would you
wanna do
be,
that one
you know,
either.
if you look at China right now, people, if they speak out at all, in fact, one of the guys who outed Ivanka Trump's company for horrible labor abuses was sitting in prison. I mean, he was imprisoned and tortured by the Chinese for outing a business. How can you, and you know, I was in China in November of '86. I lived there for a month, and it was a pretty scary place. And then when I was in '99, when I was in northern India with the Dalai Lama, we spent a week with His Holiness in Dharamsala and McLeod Ganj. And there was a young guy who had literally made the trek across the Himalayas from Tibet to Dharamsala, to India, to refuge. And he told his story. He had started out with his family, his mom and dad and a couple of brothers and sisters. And there were only a couple of them who finished the trip. I mean, some froze to death. One was shot and killed by the Chinese army. One was eaten by something, a bear or something, or killed by it. I mean, it was just a grim thing. And the thing that provoked them to leave Tibet was that a son of the family, the brother of the guy that I was talking to, had gone out in public wearing a John Lennon T-shirt. And the Chinese, who were occupying Tibet at that time, and still are to this day, the Chinese officials, again, this was 1999, the Chinese officials saw that T-shirt and thought that it was a picture of the Dalai Lama, because the Dalai Lama's glasses and John Lennon's glasses are the same kind of round, gold frames. And so they grabbed him, they took him into the center of town, and they executed him in public with much fanfare. And his family fled for their lives. And, that's what Mao brought China. How can you be supportive of that?
Well, I would disagree per se with that. But to say, first of all, China has not been a Maoist state since like the 1970s. And second of all, I'm not saying that Mao or Stalin did things that were wrong. I'm not a Maoist. I'm a Maoist third worldist, which is the continuation of Maoism, the ideological Marxist perspective of Mao, which is a sort of revisionism of the Marxist-Leninist tradition. But what I wanted to get at is that if you look at China, and if you look at the Soviet Union, and Richard Wolff can go more into detail of this, it took them only like a couple decades to get out of, serfdom and feudalism, basically. It took Europe, Japan, centuries to do. So,
yeah, but the speed with which a country can basically appropriate capitalism, as China has done in the last 20 years or so, I don't think is a measure of necessarily the quality of the government. That's probably a debatable point, because China has definitely increased the quality of life of many of their people. Jared, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Edmund Morgan's book, The Meaning of Independence, John Adams, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. It's a small book. It's anecdotes of the three presidents. I think he's a little harsh on Jefferson and a little too friendly about Adams, you know, small quibbles. But it's a fascinating look into the founders of this country. And so today I'm going to read from the chapter on George Washington. The King of England, George III, was fond of farming. His favorite diversion was to ride about his lands, chatting with the tenants about the crops. Farmer George, he called himself. His arch opponent, George Washington, had the same fondness for farming. He too enjoyed riding about his lands and talking about the crops. Indeed, there was nothing else he enjoyed quite so much. But there the likeness ceased. And among the many other matters that differentiated King George Washington from George III, none was more striking than George Washington's greater reserve and dignity. George Washington would never have taken the liberty of calling himself Farmer George, nor would he have allowed anyone else to do so. Even his friends took care to keep their distance, and those who forgot to were apt to be brought up short. A familiar anecdote, though perhaps apocryphal, well illustrates Washington's customary posture toward himself and toward others. During a meeting of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, a group of Washington's friends were remarking on his extraordinarily reserved and remote manner, even among his most intimate acquaintances. Governor Morris, who was always full of boldness and wit, had the nerve to disagree. He could be as familiar with Washington, he said, as with any of his other friends. Alexander Hamilton called his bluff by offering to provide a supper and wine for a dozen of them if Morris would, at the next reception Washington gave, simply walk up to him, gently slap him on the shoulder and say, "My dear General, how happy I am to see you look so well." On the appointed evening, a substantial number of people were already present when Morris arrived, walked up to Washington, bowed, shook hands, and then placed his left hand on Jefferson's shoulder and said, "My dear General, I am so happy to see you look so well." The response was immediate and icy. Washington reached up and removed the hand, stepped back, and fixed his eye in silence on Morris until Morris retreated, abashed, into the crowd. The company looked on in embarrassment, and no one ever tried it again. It seems a most un-American reaction, not the sort of thing that Americans like to see in the men they honor, certainly not the sort of thing one would look for in a leader of a popular revolution today. Yet Americans then and since have honored George Washington far beyond any other man in their history. Moreover, he earned the honor and his dignity and reserve. The aloofness that still separates him from us helped him to earn it. How this came about is part of the larger story of American independence, the story of how the American Revolution transformed some of the least lovable traits of a seemingly ordinary man into national assets. For besides his aloofness, Washington had other characteristics which at this distance appear less than admirable, but which served him and the nation well in the struggle for independence. Perhaps the most conspicuous of these traits, conspicuous at least in his surviving correspondence, was an unabashed concern for his own economic interest. Although Washington was fair in his dealings and did not ask favors of any man, he kept a constant, wary, and often cold eye on making a profit, ever suspicious, and not always without reason, that other men were trying to take advantage of him. Like most Virginia planters, he complained that London merchants were giving him too little for his tobacco or charging him too much for the goods he bought from them. When he rented to tenants, he demanded to be paid punctually and dismissed men's inability to meet their obligations as irresponsibility or knavery. If a man was so foolish as to try cheating him, he was capable of a fury that came through vividly in his letters, as when he wrote to one associate that, "All my concern is that I ever engaged myself in behalf of so ungrateful and dirty a fellow as you are." In operating his plantation at Mount Vernon, he inveighed endlessly against waste of time, waste of supplies, waste of money. "A penny saved is a penny got," he would say, or "many mickles make a muckle," by which he apparently meant that many small savings would add up to a larger one. Even in dealings with his mother, he was watchful, for he thought she had extravagant tastes. He was ready to supply her real wants, he said, but found her imaginary wants indefinite and oftentimes insatiable. Even after he left Mount Vernon in order to win a war and found a nation, his intense absorption with his estate persisted, somehow curiously out of place now and out of proportion to the historic events that he was grappling with. In the darkest hours of the war and later during some of the tensest national crises, he took time to write to the managers of his plantation about making it show a profit. In early December 1776, for example, after fleeing across the Delaware with the remnants of his army, he sent home instructions to make do without buying linen for the slaves, as a price is too heavy to be borne with. And while he was president, his weekly directives to his managers far exceeded in length the documents he prepared for his subordinates in government. No detail was too small for his attention. In December 1792, while his cabinet was rent by the feud between Jefferson and Hamilton, he sent orders that Anthony's, this is one of his slaves presumably, sore toe should be examined, and if it requires it, something should be done to it. Otherwise, as usual, it will serve him as apprentice to be in the house half the winter. 3 months later, when Hamilton was under attack in the House of Representatives for alleged corruption in the Treasury Department, Washington was worried that Caroline, who was never celebrated for her honesty, would steal some of the linen she was entrusted with cutting.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. With us, economist Professor Richard Wolff, economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author most recently of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. His website's democracyatwork.info and rdwolff with 2 Fs.com. You can tweet him at democracy@WRK. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
There are a couple of big stories in the news. The next big fight to save Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. Robert Reich blogging about this or talking about this. And, well, let's start there. What would America look like if the social safety net, what little there is of it? I mean, there's also the fact that, 60%, 61% of Americans literally don't have $1,000 to deal with an unexpected emergency. What would be the consequence of America losing Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security if Paul Ryan and Donald Trump and the Republican vision, Mike Pence for sure, the Koch brothers, if their vision of America was realized, what would our country be like?
Well, it would be what we have now on steroids. It would be a gap between the rich and the poor that would become all the more dramatic because Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid is what stands between millions, let me change that, tens of millions of American households and a level of poverty that we used to see in the documentaries about the third world and that would now descend on us. And by the way, it's not just the immediate sufferers who would be in trouble. The old people who rely on Medicare, the poor people who rely on Medicaid, and so on. Because the whole idea of a Social Security was not just to help the immediate beneficiaries, but their families. Every American family will now be confronted with elderly who are a large and growing part of our population who have to be helped because the Social Security and the Medicare that they rely on is being cut using the excuse of government deficits caused, of course, by the kind of tax cuts they just passed last month. You get clearly a sense of an American working class being shown in this way that they are in for a long, fundamental decline in their standards of living across the board, old and young, unless they really mobilize politically and say they won't stand for it. You have emboldened, in a sense, we have emboldened the Ryans of the world, the Koch brothers, because they have been able to whittle away benefits, pensions, and all the rest of it for years now, that they can kind of finish us off in a way by cutting these last remaining foundations of the so-called safety net. And I think it bodes very, very badly for the whole atmosphere of this country.
But here's the argument that conservatives make, and Russell Kirk more or less laid this out. I mean, not in the words that I'm using, but the essence of it in his 1951 book, The Conservative Mind, which kicked off the modern conservative movement, is that, you know, Victorian England, where you had, which people are familiar with through Charles Dickens' writings, particularly The Christmas Carol, you know, where you had the very, very rich, right, the royal family and their patrons and their friends and whatnot, very, very small slice of British society. And then you had the middle class, which Scrooge was. He was a businessman. He had a small business with one employee. The middle class was very small. It was basically doctors and lawyers. And then you had this massive class that was over 90% of England's population that was the working poor. And they had maximum wage laws to prevent the working poor from ever becoming middle class. So it wasn't that you couldn't pay somebody less than something, you couldn't pay them more than something. And the argument that conservatives make is that that produced one of the most stable economic and political systems in the history of the world. It lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years in Europe, and therefore we should consider returning to that. How do you respond? I mean, this is what's animating the Republican Party right now. How do you respond to that?
Well, I have no idea what the word stability means. You condemned the British people, the mass of the British people, to a level of misery and upset documented in Dickens's other books, Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, The Tale of Two Cities, and all the rest of it. Whatever the stability means, it is what the view from the top is, because they don't concern themselves with the absolute turmoil that kind of a system imposes on the mass of the people. And in England, it particularly produced in the 20th century the upheaval that created the British safety net system, which is a much more generous system even now than what we have here in the United States. They have a basically free higher education, subsidized heavily, much more than the United States. They have the famous National Health Service, which continues because the mass of people want it. Those were upheavals that produced all of that. And it also meant that the British sacrificed, because of their troubles with the mass of people, sacrificed this their dominance. You know, it's an interesting story to say they were socially stable, but at the time Dickens wrote, Britain ruled the waves. Britain was an empire on which the sun never set. To be unpleasantly blunt and truthful, Britain is now a cold, wet, offshore island of the continent of Europe, being shown out the door by the Europeans because they have sunk to such a level, and they have a government that is dysfunctional today and a welling up of support for the Labour Party. It's not really a story of the conservative victory, and it is not a story about stability unless the turmoil caused in the lives of mass of people is ignored by someone, which is, I think, what Mr. Kirk was basically saying. And maybe in America we'll get to that point too, but it won't be because we're stable. It'll be because we have an intelligentsia that looks the other way and justifies the crushing of a middle class. The last point I would make is the British in that period of time weren't coming off of a capitalism that had celebrated itself by saying we created a great middle class. In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, that's how American capitalism celebrated itself. That was how it was to be thought of relative to the Soviet Union, which provided so many social services by the government. We had a stable middle class. You don't hear it anymore because we've just crushed our middle class, and this taking away the Social Security will take us one step further. But to call that stability is to pretend that when you crush the lives of mass of people, putting them into the kind of turmoil we see reflected in the opioid crisis and 100 other indices, to call that stability is an act of sugarcoating that kind of takes your breath away.
Yeah, I agree. In the minute we have left, a quick question. Back in the Reagan era, the argument was made that when government borrowing expands rapidly and too big, that the government ultimately will not be able to find customers for their bonds. The bond market will collapse. That'll lead to a stock market collapse. That'll lead to an implosion of the economy. There was some speculation in the Financial Times a couple days ago that this might be happening right now because of this $1.5 trillion we're going to borrow to fund the tax cut for billionaires. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's always funny to me that the same people who told you before that there could never be a deficit, the deficit is too high, the deficit is going to be a problem, then blithely created a tax cut which, makes the deficit go much higher for a short time, telling us it doesn't matter. Now that the tax cut is achieved, we're going to go backwards again and suddenly be concerned about a deficit and use that to justify cutting the social safety net. The dishonesty, the opportunism wrapped up in that way of thinking makes a mockery of any effort to understand the economic system.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Richard Wolff, economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens. Democracyatwork.info is the website, and rdwolf with 2fs.com. Professor, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Me too. I always learn from you. Thank you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day, your calls and my thoughts on all of the above right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Brenda in Newport News, Virginia. Hey, Brenda, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks so much for having Dr. Wolff on. He always hits it right out of the park.
Amen.
You were talking earlier about Britain's privatization and the healthcare and the example that it shows how much that can cost us. We have an excellent example right now in the privatization that's been going on in the military. For example, the military housing, the military health care, even their military travel. The military housing, the privatization has been such a failure that they're now offering their housing to civilians to move on post, which I think would be a security risk, whereas before when it was being run by the military, it was in such high demand that people were waiting for months to get in.
Mm-hmm.
In the healthcare, you've got people like Humana now running military healthcare instead of them providing healthcare services directly to the military. You've got these companies that are now doing managed care, which you know what the problem is in that area.
Sure, it's managed for profit.
Exactly. And it actually limits the care that the healthcare givers can actually give to the military members and their family. And then even the military travel, believe it or not, is privatized. Instead of the government paying directly, as they have in the past, for the travel of its military members and their families, Citicorp is now benefiting from that through their credit card program. If we really want to see what the cost is and what this could cost us, we need to be paying more attention to the GAO reports and really paying attention to that and heading off the privatization of Medicare and the other institutions that government should be handling.
Very well said, Brenda, and spot on. I can't dispute it. I can't add anything to it. That was very comprehensive. Brenda, thank you so much for the call. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Corky in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, we got to start. You're going to be my Braveheart. You got to start putting out. This is the biggest crime family that's ever existed in New York. And they're running the White House.
The which crime family?
The Trump crime family.
Oh, the Trump crime family. Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
They're bigger than the Teflon Don.
Yep.
And people got to start waking up.
Hey, you know, Trump learned from New York City mafiosa, you know, some of the most competent, capable, powerful in the world. They're certainly in the United States anyway. And he learned well, you know, he learned well.
Yeah.
And his daddy Fred, you know, with his whites-only housing and all that kind of stuff, and going to Ku Klux Klan rallies and getting arrested at one of them. I mean, you know, Donald Trump learned well.
Yeah, well, why can't our voters recognize this? Why can't they put two and two together?
Well, the media doesn't cover it that way. The media looks at Trump as something to generate eyeballs for advertising. And, you know, if they exposed Trump, then they wouldn't be able to. I mean, they're running his speech right now on MSNBC. It's like, why are you doing this? You know, giving him, you know, if you were a commercial company and you went to MSNBC and said, I want to buy an hour of your time, it would be a fortune. It would be millions and millions and millions of dollars. And they're just giving this gift to Trump while he's addressing the Republicans. He's not addressing Americans. I have no interest in seeing a politician addressing his own political party, frankly. You know, I'd read about it in the New York Times. You know, there should be. I'm quite sure there isn't. But, Corky, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Stick around.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. What a day. What a day. Okay. The national monuments. This is mind-boggling. This is going to happen tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. 9 o'clock Eastern Time tomorrow morning. Bears Ears National Monument cut by 85%. Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument cut by half. And if you are a mining company, and tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you go out to any old property, any old land you want that used to be the Bears Ears National Park or the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. If you go out there with 4 stakes that you can stick in the ground and some string that you can attach to them, and you put them in the ground and say, this is my land. I am staking a claim. This law was literally, I mean, this law was passed in 1872, the mining law. And this is, of course, how they did it in 1872. You stake your claim, and then you write it up, and you go to the local BLM office, and you register it, and you pay a small fee every year to hold that land as your claim. And then, of course, if you're a mining company, you go in and you bring in your backhoes and your giant machines, and you start tearing up the earth and digging it out and mining it and ruining the area. As Jenny Rowland writes over at Think Progress, this move put tens of thousands of Native American sacred sites at risk, along with key wildlife habitat and areas used for outdoor recreation. As the United Nations just tweeted, #USA, the decision to reduce the area, this is the United Nations, the UN Human Rights Council, UNHCR. The decision to reduce the area included in Bears Ears National Monument in Utah by 85% is a huge setback for the protection of the rights of indigenous people. It's breathtaking. Ryan Zinke says, oh, you know, we're not doing this just for mineral development. We're not doing this for mineral development. In fact, Rob Bishop, the congressman from Utah, the Republican from Utah, he says, well, we're not doing this for mineral development. Guess what's happening at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? The gold rush is on. only in this case, instead of gold, it's mostly uranium, vanadium, and oil, and coal. Bears Ears in particular, writes Jenny Rowland over at Think Progress, has proven deposits of uranium and other minerals within its original boundaries. One company, Energy Fuels Resources, owns and operates a uranium mine just outside the original monument. In May, that company submitted a letter to Ryan Zinke, to the Interior Department, requesting reductions to the monument, to Bears Ears. Of course, Zinke did it, and noted, quote, there are also many other known uranium and vanadium deposits located within the original boundaries that could provide valuable energy and mineral resources in the future. You know, when the United Nations comes out and says what you're doing is wrong to your own people, to your own land, to your own country, maybe you should pay attention. I mentioned the assault on civil service. I talked about this a couple days ago. Well, I talked about this yesterday, I guess, because of Trump's thing. You know, I call on Congress to empower every cabinet secretary with the authority to fire federal employees who undermine or fail the American people. Right. And Dorothy, Valley Dorothy tweets, the civil service system, which prevents corruption in the government workforce, and keep in mind, that's why the civil service was created, was to prevent corruption, is about to be deconstructed, she writes, or she tweets, about to be deconstructed by boss Trump and Tammany Hall. And that's exactly what's going on. This is, you know, we talked about privatization in the first segment, and this is exactly what's going on. It's worse than privatization. In fact, it's basically selling the wealth of our country. The Economic Policy Institute just came out with a notice. Workers' health, safety, and pay are casualties in Trump's war on regulations. You recall Trump bragged in his State of the Union address that for every one regulation passed, they eliminated 22 of them. The regulations are also known as consumer and worker protections. That's what they are. They're there to protect us. So EPI Policy Director Heidi Shierholz says, ultimately, regulations are just the rules of the game. Remember the other day I had a caller call in and he was like, you know, wow, you know, I'm a libertarian. And I used the metaphor of, okay, if we wanted to have a libertarian football game, the NFL went libertarian. Whichever team had the most money could have the most players on the field. You're not just limited to 11 players. You can have 12, 14, 16, 18, whatever, depending on how much money you throw to the NFL. We'll change the rules for you, or we'll blow up the rules for you. Now, most of us would not be interested in seeing a game like that. It wouldn't be fair. But see, fairness has nothing to do with Trump or Republicans or so-called conservatives. Heidi Shierholz says, by rolling back regulations that protect workers' health, workers' safety, and workers' wages, Trump is simply rigging the rules to benefit corporations and the wealthy. And then they go through the list. So among the regulations rolled back or delayed, and let's take this from the abstract to the concrete here. Expanded workers' access to overtime pay, gone. Required federal contractors to disclose labor law violations, gone. Required employers to keep accurate records of workplace injuries, gone. Protected workers from harmful exposure to silica and beryllium, gone. Made it easier for people to save for retirement, gone. The Trump administration instead has proposed change that would allow employers to illegally pocket workers' tips, expose farm workers to the harmful effects of pesticide, and dangerously increase the line speeds in poultry plants. Sonny Perdue. Yeah.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls after this.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Fight for the Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great, by Professor Harvey J. Kaye, who's a professor of democracy and justice studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. This is from the introduction, page 1. We need to remember. We need to remember what conservatives have never wanted us to remember and what liberals have all too often forgotten. Now, after more than 30 years of subordinating the public good to corporate priorities and private greed, of subjecting ourselves to widening inequality and intensifying insecurities, and of denying our democratic impulses and yearnings, we need to remember. We need to remember who we are. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who rescued the United States from the economic destruction of the Great Depression and defended it against fascism and imperialism in the Second World War. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who not only saved the nation from economic ruin and political oblivion, but also turned it into the strongest and most prosperous country on earth. And most of all, we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who accomplished all that in the face of powerful, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, and despite all their own faults and failings, by making America freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. Now, when all they fought for is under siege, and we, too, find ourselves confronting crises and forces that threaten the nation and all that it stands for, now we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the most progressive generation in American history. We are the children of the men and women who articulated, fought for, and endowed us with the promise of the four freedoms. On the afternoon of January 6, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt went up to Capitol Hill to deliver his annual message to Congress. Just weeks earlier, he had defeated the Republican Wendell Willkie at the polls and won re-election to an unprecedented third term. But Roosevelt now faced a far greater challenge, one even more daunting than those he confronted in his first and second terms. Still stalked by the Great Depression, the United States was also increasingly threatened by the Axis power, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. And with war already raging east and west, Americans had yet to agree about how to respond to the danger. The president, however, did not falter. He not only proceeded to propose measures to address the emergency, he gave dramatic new meaning to all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we the people of the United States, a new birth of freedom, and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. FDR knew about crises, but he knew as well what Americans could accomplish even in the darkest of times. Born in 1882, he had grown up privileged, the son of New York Hudson River gentry. Yet long before becoming president, he had suffered serious defeats and setbacks, none more devastating than contracting polio in 1921 at the age of 39. The disease left him permanently unable to stand up or walk without assistance. However, supported by his wife Eleanor and other family members and friends, he had risen above the paralysis to become the most dynamic political figure in the United States. Moreover, his experiences and encounters in the course of doing so had reaffirmed and deepened his already powerful faith and confidence in God, in himself, and in his fellow citizens, all of which had enabled him, in the face of the worst economic and social catastrophe in the nation's history, to defiantly state that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and then go on to proclaim this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. Armed with this faith and confidence and propelled by the popular energies that his words and elections elicited, he determinedly pursued the initiatives of relief, recovery, reconstruction, and reform known as the New Deal. Together, president and people severely tested each other, made mistakes and regrettable compromises, and suffered defeats and disappointments. Nevertheless, challenging each other to live up to their finest ideals, Roosevelt and his fellow citizens advanced them further than either had expected or even imagined possible. Confronting fierce, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, they not only rejected authoritarianism, but also redeemed the nation's historic purpose and promise by initiating revolutionary changes in American government and public life and radically extending American freedom, equality, and democracy. They subjected big business to public account and regulation, empowered the federal government to address the needs of working people, mobilized and organized labor unions, fought for their rights, broadened and leveled the we and we the people, established a social security system, expanded the nation's public infrastructure, improved the environment, cultivated the arts, and refashioned popular culture. And while much remained to be done, they imbued themselves with fresh democratic convictions, hopes, and aspirations. Standing before the American people and their assembled representatives that early January day, the president surely believed
their rendezvous with destiny had come. He told them straightforwardly that Americans were now confronting a moment unprecedented in the history of the United States. A moment unprecedented because never before had American security been as seriously threatened from without. And he refused to appease those who threatened our nation's safety. The book is The Fight for the Four Freedoms by Harvey K. .com. You can listen any. Welcome back to the program. Russell in Hickory Hills, Illinois. Hey, Russell, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I've been listening to your show. Maybe what I'm about to say shouldn't be a concern. I watched MSNBC last night, Chris Hayes, you know, the whole thing. And underneath it says, House Treasury urges Democrats today to raise the debt ceiling, and I'm paraphrasing some of it. This tax cut has blood sucked us dry. We are flat broke. We got to have a raise. Tom, it's January 31st, and we already got to raise the debt ceiling. This is going to be unsustainable. You can't raise it fast enough to keep up above the debt ceiling. And I don't want Pence in there. I want Donald Trump to feel this. This is ridiculous. I don't know how you feel, but January 31st, and we're already flat broke for the tax cut?
Well, part of that is because there have been 6 continuing resolutions since last fall. I mean, it's the government budget runs October 1st. No, October 1st to September 31st. And so, you know, we were supposed to have a new budget before October of last year for 2018, and we're operating without a budget. You know, we're operating based on continuing resolutions where basically they say, okay, whatever we did last month, we'll just do this month. And that's no way to run a government, period. So, I mean, this is just an example of how these guys can't govern, don't even care to govern. I mean, they see government as an opportunity to loot the natural resources and the commons of the United States, of the American people, on behalf of their billionaire benefactors. That's it. And that's why they don't give a rat's ass about the debt ceiling right now. They will raise the debt ceiling, I guarantee you, and they don't need the Democrats to do it. They can, well, they may in the House where they've got, you know, the so-called Freedom Caucus. But I'm guessing that even the Freedom Caucus, they're really, I call them the Cokehead Caucus because they're there because of Koch brothers' money. And you know, the Koch brothers want the government to continue operating too. They've got a bunch of businesses that get huge government subsidies and lots of government support. So I'm guessing that they will continue to raise the debt ceiling until there are Democrats in charge. Once there's Democrats in charge, then it's going to be full-out freak-out. This is the two Santa Claus theory that Judah Wininsky laid out in 1976 and the Republican Party embraced wholeheartedly, and most Americans don't even know about. That when Republicans control government, their job needs to be to cut taxes, to be the Santa Claus of tax cuts, and to raise debt. So that when Democrats come into office and Democrats try to use government money to do something that will benefit the people of the United States rather than the billionaires of the United States, that they can scream loudly and say, we can't afford it, we're in debt, we can't do it, there's not enough money, you know, stop, we can't do it. And that's going to become the big battle. So, you know, that'll happen after the election if the Democrats take the House or Senate. And the way things are going right now, I'm skeptical about that. Because, you know, Trump, you got the Koch brothers coming in with millions and millions of dollars, $400 million for this next election cycle. Right now, they're running ads telling people how wonderful the tax cut was for them. You've got a billionaire who owns a television network, Rupert Murdoch and Fox So-Called News, you know, constantly promoting these billionaire-friendly memes. And it's going to be really tough. We need all hands on board. Russell, thanks for the call. Peggy in Maumee, Ohio. Hey, Peggy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Just want to tell you I've been a fan of yours for many, many years.
Well, thank you.
And the reason that I'm calling today is to inform you and fellow Ohioans that there is a fair district petition that I would like to call on my fellow Ohioans to sign that will put a anti-gerrymandering initiative on the ballot in November. And if you go to fairdistrictsohio.org, then you can get all the information about where to sign, if you want to pick up a petition, how to do that, and gives you information about it.
This is to undo the Republican gerrymander of Ohio and turn it into a neutral gerrymander, essentially, a neutral redrawing?
Fair districts, fair elections.
Yeah, there
in
you go.
Ohio, we have only 4 Democratic, congressmen because it's been gerrymandered so badly, and we may be even losing one because Ohio has had a sluggish population growth, so it would be only 3. And Ohio is a pretty big state, so I would like to encourage all Ohioans. FairDistrictsOhio.org. It is sponsored by the League of Women Voters.
Good, good. Thank you, Peggy, for that, and good luck with it. Ryan in North Branch, Minnesota. Hey, Ryan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Mike Pence isn't just a cardboard cutout of Race Bannon, that cartoon character strongman or bodyguard of Johnny Quest. He's also known for his misogyny. His policy of never dining alone with a woman, not his wife, leaps to mind. I just wanted to get your thoughts on should Pence become president, if abortion rules in each state would be dismantled in the next 8 years, because it's looking more and more likely that a Pence presidency could become a reality.
Yeah, I agree. And if Pence is not setting himself up right now with this nationwide tour that he's about to embark on for becoming the president when Trump is impeached or resigns, I think he's certainly thinking that, he might run in 2020 if Trump decides it's no fun anymore, or to heck with it, or, whatever. So, and there's no doubt in my mind that if Mike Pence becomes president, you will see a nationwide effort. There's obviously a nationwide effort going on right now, supported by the Republican Party, to make it illegal for women to get abortions and to get birth control in many places, and certain types of birth control like IUDs. And that'll just go on steroids. I mean, this is going to be a live or die, literally, for some women, a situation for the women and girls of America. And I hope that they're paying attention. I hope that they know what's going on. Ryan, thanks for the call. Audrey in Newark, Delaware, you want to talk about Black History Month?
Yes, Tom, just wanted to tell you, I like your show, and I enjoy listening to your show. You were saying that Dr. Woodson put Black History Month in February, the shortest month of the year. He decided on February because of Abraham Lincoln's birthday and Frederick Douglass' birthday is in February.
Oh, thank you for that. I didn't know that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Pardon my interrupting.
Yeah, that's why it's February.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Audrey, I appreciate the information. Cleve in Clayton, Georgia. Hey, Cleve, what's up?
Oh, Tom, I just want to talk to you about your Bastion, Washington. We're all human beings. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody does things according to their time.
I don't understand your point, Cleve.
Well, my point is, your Bastion, General George Washington, the founder of our country.
I am?
Yes, you are.
How?
And you also...
Wait a second. How am I bashing George Washington?
We're talking about all the negative things you did in his life as opposed to the positive things you did. It was...
What are you talking about?
When Washington won the war, they offered to make him emperor or king of the country.
I know. He turned it down.
But he didn't do that. He turned it down.
It wasn't actually... Nobody actually offered it to him. There was a debate about it.
Of not running for more than 2 offices. Well, only the Roosevelts are the only 2 people that ever break that.
Yeah, Cleve, I think that you must not be a regular viewer or listener to our program. George Washington was a slaveholder, and that's pretty extremely deplorable. But that said, he did birth our nation. Robert in Westminster had 3 horses shot out from underneath him in the process. Robert from Westminster, Colorado. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. Dr. Wolf mentioned today about the view from the top, which reminded me of yesterday. We were talking about the 2 Santa Claus theory.
Mm-hmm.
The people looking from the top probably believe in Santa Claus. The problem with their theory is one of the Santa Clauses is the productivity that comes from the working class, and the other Santa Claus is a giant shop vac that they use to suck the money out of the working class. And the valve that controls the flow is our government. That's why they want to drown it in a bathtub.
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, regulations are simply the rules of the game of commerce. And and other things, but typically associated with commerce. And if you don't have rational rules for the game, you're going to have an irrational outcome, and which is what we're getting right now.
And that's the valve, the control valve. And the only reason, I mean, we the people, the working class, we can thrive and survive without them, but they cannot survive without us.
Yeah, amen. And that was the argument. That's the point that unions used to make. Robert, well said. Thank you. Keith in Point Arena, California. Hey, Keith, got a minute and a half here. What's up?
Good morning, Tom. Good to join the discourse here. Really appreciate it.
Keith, I'm really sorry. I've got to put you on hold. Your phone is breaking up so badly, I can't tell what you're saying. He's on line 9, Arthur. Mike in Croton-on-Hudson. Got something you can fit into a minute, Mike?
Yeah, Tom, I'm wondering if the Democrats couldn't push a balanced current account amendment. I was looking at it the other day. I'm shocked how much we've spent in the last 15 years. We're bleeding away tens of trillions of dollars. And it's shocking when I look at it. Anyway, thank you for taking.
Well, there's a simple thing, Mike. If you can't afford your mortgage, if you can't afford your lifestyle, you either dial back your lifestyle or you increase your income. And what the Republicans just did is they decreased our income by cutting taxes and borrowing the money for the tax cuts. And that money is going to have to be paid back with interest, $1.5 trillion. And you know, that makes no sense at all, if that's the current account that you're talking about.
Well, I was looking at the current account that, goods and services, the total value of goods and services that are traded overseas with our trading partners.
Oh, you're talking about the balance of trade.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. That's a whole nother rant, and unfortunately we're hitting the break, but I totally agree with you. I think that we're hitting, about a $600 billion trade deficit for last year?
It's rising again.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And of course, that's Trump's policies. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we'll be checking in with Luke Vargas in about 5 minutes, 4.5 minutes, something like that, with Talk Media News. Stick around. And welcome back. Warren in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Warren, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I'm a member of National Active Retired Federal Employees.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I'd give you a little bit of history of the Civil Service Commission. President Grant had worked on a Civil Service Commission during his second term in office, since he had dealt with a few issues with his appointees.
Right.
But after the assassination of James Garfield, people felt maybe we do need a professional workforce, and the Pendleton Act of 1883 established the Civil Service Commission. And thus, I think there was a change to the Civil Service Commission in 1978, but the spoils system was really in effect under Andrew Jackson.
Yep.
And
Trump's hero.
Yeah, and I guess that's Trump's hero. And Pence should know a lot about the spoils system, because unfortunately, was a Democratic governor, McNutt, in Indiana, who established it during his term as governor.
Mm-hmm.
And he was supposedly a Democrat, but he fought with Roosevelt throughout his term.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally worked briefly under the spoils system, and when we received our pay, 2% of your pay went back to the governor of Indiana.
Really?
So yeah. Oh,
wow.
Yeah. When I got paid, they'd say, well, 2% is going to go back to the governor.
To his campaign funds or into his pocket?
Or
to his office?
It was going back. They said it's just going back to the governor, so I don't know if it went back to his campaign funds or in his pocket or what.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And what year was that, Warren?
I was working back in 1970. I think it was 73 or 74.
Wow. In our lifetime. And has Indiana since then adopted a civil service model, as most states have?
They have. I'm not sure how they strictly they adhere to it now, since I haven't been back to Indiana for years.
Yeah.
But I worked under the spoils system, and
so it was the Pendleton Act. Was this when Grant was president, or was it when who followed Grant? It was the guy who was the one. Chester
Arthur signed the act.
Okay.
Yeah. And but Grant did work on it because they had some scandal during his administration, and he realized that maybe we need to have professionals in the field with expertise, and so he was working on the commission, but it didn't go anywhere until Garfield was assassinated, and then people said, maybe we do need some professionals in agriculture and science and whatever.
Yeah. In the various cabinet areas. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, excellent, Warren. Warren, thank you for educating me. I really appreciate it. I should have frankly taken the time to look all that stuff up myself before I did my rant. And I really appreciate your adding to it. Thank you so much. We'll be back. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in just a minute.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
In standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
And welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. Luke Vargas, chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, based at the United Nations. You can follow him on Twitter at The Courier, is on the line with us. Hey, Luke.
Hey, Tom. Glad to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. So, Trump's infrastructure plan. Yes, we're gonna do $1 trillion worth of infrastructure for $200 billion. Do I have that right?
Yeah, well, he actually said 1.5 trillion, so he upped it by a substantial margin from what he had been saying. I think he said in his address to Congress last year, $1 billion.
Yeah.
And now, because we have seen and continue to see American infrastructure continue to worsen, and all the, foremost experts in this field who've been doing economic analyses do think that number, amount we need to funnel into infrastructure is around that 1.5 to $2 trillion.
And that's for
figure.
just dealing with crises.
Yes, that's not, new projects that would probably be useful.
Yeah, and Trump says we're going to make a world-class infrastructure. That's going to take $4 trillion.
Yeah, so what the White House held a background briefing yesterday to go over this, and this is often common after State of the Unions. I mean, you saw the Obama administration put out much more detailed white papers by comparison than this, but they at least tried to sort of present a few details here. I think, though, everyone is pretty underwhelmed. I mean, what we're hearing is that there is, Trump is asking Congress to actually spend $200 billion over 10 years, which is not a lot, not a very much money.
$20 billion a year.
That's
chump change at the Pentagon. $20 billion a year.
Yeah. And we don't know how that would be allocated. The administration seems to think it will be offset by budget cuts, but they didn't specify what they are, so they're leaving that up to Congress. And they believe this $200 billion can be leveraged to generate $1.3 trillion in spending. That would be borne by cities and states and by private companies. And there's a huge privatization push in here as well, which they didn't get into all that much. But there, if you go around to certain states, there are plans to take highways and bridges and turn them over to private companies to operate.
Yeah. Mike Pence did this in Indiana. He sold off the Indiana freeway or tollway or whatever it is to a company in Australia.
Exactly. So I will point out also there is no specific projects that the White House is identifying here, no guidance on what Congress should focus on, which again, I guess I could kind of see an argument where you could say, maybe the Congress should be left up to decide sort of what parts of the budget get trimmed in order to fund this. But the White House is kind of the perfect organ to summon a panel of experts and drum up a list of recommended projects. So for them not to be doing anything there, I think, is also another oversight. And I'll finally say, Matt Iglesias over at Vox did a good analysis on this proposal today and said, look, it's really worth pointing out that states and cities have a much higher demand on them to balance their budgets. They have less fiscal capacity. Essentially, if there's anybody that should be taking over a greater part of the spending here, it should be the federal government. That's not to say they need to do 100% of it, but ponying up so little and not specifying if you're going to do federal matching funds, it just leaves cities and states with a huge financial burden that most of them probably won't even undertake. So it seems hard to imagine this actually getting anywhere close to that $1.5 trillion total, if indeed we even get what Trump is asking for.
Yeah, it's a scam. It's another scam. The U.S. is condemning Poland over a new law that they're planning to, vote on, roll out? Has it been voted on? What's the status of this that would criminalize people who say, yeah, Poland participated with the Nazis in the Holocaust?
Yeah, so this bill is now poised to be signed by Poland's president. It's cleared both of the houses of Poland's Congress. Those in favor of this bill, which is championed by Poland's Conservative Law and Justice Party, say this is important. You have to fight historical denial. You have to, preserve the truth of what happened. And it's worth pointing out, in particularly Soviet-occupied Poland, there were people who were, conspiring with the Nazi state, who, carried out horrific acts at concentration camps, but in an attempt to, sort of polish Polish national credentials, started describing these are Germans, rather. I'm getting my history a little confused here, but these are people who tried to shift the blame to Poland by coining new terms like Polish concentration camps as opposed to Nazi concentration camps in Poland. So there's concern in this current government that they are being forced to atone for things that happened on Polish soil. The real danger here is it's completely subjective what would be considered, incorrect historical speech here. And you've seen the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Board put out a statement this week saying this is very dangerous. It risks Poland losing its central place in Holocaust research. Why would anyone go there? And could they even talk about what they're researching if it's now criminalized?
Well, beyond that,
that Poland participated.
It's opening a door to censoring free speech.
Of course, that's a criticism the U.S. government has pointed out. And I will say, we have seen, I'm Polish, it's difficult to read these stories as they come out, but there are instances like the Jedwabne massacre in which, 300 Jews were burned alive in a barn in Poland. There have been books and stuff coming out recently that pin blame on more than just the Nazis here. So I think...
it's just like Vichy France, and the Norwegians.
Exactly.
But France and Norway and Holland, countries that had, not Nazi collaborator governments, have owned up to it. Poland doesn't want to?
Yeah, it doesn't seem so. So we'll see if this gets passed. The U.S. is condemning it. But I have to say, on judicial reform, on a whole lot of other things, the Polish government, or this current conservative one, has been pretty happy to stand at odds with Europe and the U.S. on certain issues. So I don't see this getting stopped.
Thank you, Luke. We just hit the break.
From New York, this is your
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Hey, Steve, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. Last night, Bernie Sanders was on Rachel Maddow, and he did something and said something which I really appreciated, and that was a kind of talked about strategy, and that the resistance is really important. It's a critical part of the strategy, but it comes with also continuing to push progressive agenda because that's what the country wants. So we have to resist Donald Trump and push for $15 an hour, and push for free college tuition, and push for expanding Social Security, not just preserving it. And all of these things have to happen at the same time, which makes our job that much more difficult. But I really appreciated hearing that the party and the left has to be more than just being opposed to Trump. They actually have to be for progressive agendas, and that I just wanted to share that with you. And I really
and that's what people want. Steve, in 1981, one of the advisors to I think it was Lee Atwater, one of the advisors to Ronald Reagan, I may be wrong on exactly who it was, but I'm pretty sure it was Lee Atwater, came up with this idea of what he referred to as the perpetual campaign. Kevin Phillips, I think, later wrote a book about this. And basically was every single day that goes by should be an opportunity to get some press that will cause more people, more kind of undecided people or low information people to think you're doing a great job, your party's doing a great job, and the next election comes, I really should vote for you. And Reagan was the first presidency where we saw this continual, perpetual campaign. He campaigned, or he or his surrogates, literally every day of the 8 years that he was president. And that was not something that was picked up by Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton didn't have to do it methodically because he was such a brilliant politician himself. He was always down on the Hill, glad-handing people and talking to people and talking to the press and stuff. And of course, it would have been very difficult given all the impeachment hearings and whatnot. But basically, every Republican has done this, and the Obama administration did not even remotely consider doing something like this. They have done the opposite of this. They've basically kind of said, we're governing things. We've got this. Chill out. Don't worry. We've got this under control. And that, obviously has not worked well. And I didn't see Bernie on Rachel last night because I was in bed by then. But I have read the articles about it. I saw a clip of it this morning. And it looks to me like what Bernie is proposing is that Democrats start doing what Republicans figured out works in 1980.
Can I add one more thing?
Please.
I think when people are saying we want leadership that fights, to me what that means is we may not have the votes necessarily to win, but we'll still push legislation that pushes progressive agendas. So we may not have the votes to get like $15 an hour on the federal level, but if we still push it and Republicans vote it down, or if we still push for free college tuition and Republicans vote it down, at least we're fighting for the things that we believe in.
Yep.
And I know that's something I would appreciate, and I think most of the country would appreciate too, because most of the country, I think across the political aisle, still wants these progressive agendas.
We're a progressive country. There's just no doubt about that. There's any poll will tell you that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Steve, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be back in and thanks for the great observation, by the way, Steve. I really think that this is the key to the whole thing. Is now for the next, now I was going to say for the next 4 years, maybe now forever, the Democrats, progressive Democrats, need to get up and get out there, get organized and get out there every single day with their message.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Ivanka Trump is a big fan, apparently, of really bad labor conditions. And, she's out there going, oh, we should have paid leave for women who have babies, but not in China, where her stuff is made. No siree, Bob. Ivanka Trump's workers, now they obviously don't work directly for her, they work for the contractors or company contracts with, but the workers who make Ivanka Trump's products, they got a very different world, a very different life. There's an article by Erica Kainz in the San Francisco newspaper, this is at sfgate.com, and the headline is Apple versus Ivanka Trump, competing ethics collide in China. And the article talks about how in 2016, Apple basically got busted. And they got busted by a group called China Labor Watch that is a local Chinese group that sends people into Chinese factories to find out what the labor conditions are like. And they came back, they reported back in 2016 that the factory where they were making iPhones in China, the people were suffering from wage theft. They weren't being paid for the hours that they were working. And, the pay to begin with wasn't all that great, but they weren't being paid, So Apple actually went into that factory and said, hey, to their contractor, hey, wait a minute, you're going to pay these people their wages. And we will pay you to pay them their wages. Apple did that. Now, they're still making their stuff in China, but they did it. After Ivanka Trump, these same people, the same group, they went into Trump's factories and said, hey, this is terrible, these conditions. Its suppliers, the workers were complaining of low wages, forced overtime, verbal and physical abuse, and said that, so this is what was charged against Ivanka's companies. And her response was, oh, our shoes haven't been made at that factory in several months. And then the three men investigating Ivanka Trump's supply chain factory were arrested. This was last year. They were arrested by the Chinese government. And not a word from Ivanka, not a word from her company, nothing. So you've got this real contrast between Apple at least saying, okay, we at least want our are essentially slave labor. Well, I mean, people are paid now, but we want our cheap labor to be at least paid what they agreed to work for. Ivanka Trump, not so much. The article goes on to say the 3 men arrested last May while investigating Ivanka Trump's supply chains worked with China Labor Watch, the same group that called out Apple for underpaying workers in 2016. One of the detained investigators, Hua Hiafeng, spent his month in jail sleeping on the floor near a bucket that served as the toilet for around 20 men. Police ordered him not to speak to the media, and he declined to comment for this story. His wife, Deng Julian, said neighbors in their small hometown in central China's Hubei province think Hua sold state secrets to the U.S. She had to go back to work and now does the overnight shift at a karaoke parlor, sleeping in a nearby dormitory. She gets just 3 days off a month to see her young children. And she said, whatever they do, I won't be afraid. I've already tasted the most horrifying things. Thank you, Ivanka Trump. So this is the world that Ivanka Trump and that Donald, and I mean, just basically, this is the world the billionaire capitalists want to bring to you. If it works for China, it'll work for America, right? And they're getting us there. Since Reaganomics has devastated the American middle class, we are now at a situation where only 39% of Americans can come up with $1,000 on demand to deal with a crisis like their car just got smashed into, or they have to go into the hospital and they got to pay some kind of deductible. Only 39% of us, 4 out of 10 Americans roughly, can afford $1,000. Medical bills are particularly foreboding, writes Eleanor Goldberg for Huffington Post. The headline, most Americans can't afford a minor emergency. In 2016, medical expenses were the biggest contributor to increasing the number of individuals living in poverty. This is according to the Census Bureau, right? This is not some left-wing think tank. It's the damn Census Bureau. That year, 2016, 10.5 million Americans fell below the poverty line just because of medical bills. 10.5 million Americans fell into poverty last year, the year before last, excuse me. The last year of the Obama administration, 10.5 million Americans fell below poverty simply because somebody in their family got sick. And when people fall below the poverty line, typically they're not living at that level, and it's devastating to their families. This leads to insane levels of financial stress. They very often lose their jobs as a result of this because we don't have unions anymore. You have no guarantee of employment in the United States. And the medical bills are just wiping people out. 44% of Americans, of adults in the United States, can't afford to come up with $400 to deal with an emergency. This is Ivanka Trump's labor model playing out in the United States post-Reaganomics. Meanwhile, the Trump family businesses are doing really well, as are the rest of the corporations in America. David Brunori, writing for Forbes magazine. Now, this was a couple of years ago. This is March 14th, 2014. Where is the outrage over corporate welfare? He says 3/4 of all state economic development subsidies went to just 965 corporations since 1976, which is when they first started this study. The Fortune 500 corporations, the 500 richest, wealthiest, most fabulous corporations in America, got more than 16,000 subsidy awards. This is welfare from our government, worth $63 billion. Boeing receives $13 billion in government handouts, and everyone yawns. 514 economic developments in programs in more than 50 states in the District of Columbia. It's not just the federal government. There's 514 of these things. There were more than 245,000 awards under those programs. This is crony capitalism. There's no other way to describe it. Narrow business interests, writes David Brunori, manipulate government policymakers, and those interests profit to the detriment of everyone else. Free markets be damned. The 965 companies in the report received over $110 billion in public money. Just Berkshire Hathaway Warren Buffett's company, good Democrat. The company has $485 billion in assets, showed $20 billion in profits. They got over $1 billion in government money. $1 billion? Really? I mean, this is a corporate welfare system that is absolutely breathtaking. And what does this cost? $870 per taxpayer. Every one of America's 115 million families, not even taxpayer, per family in the United States, there's 115 million families. Each family paid $870 a year for direct subsidies and grants to corporations, number one. Number two, each family spent $696 for business incentives at state, county, and local levels. Number three, the Tax Foundation concluded that special provisions cost taxpayers over $100 billion a year. That's $870 per family. You add all this up, just those three things. Those are just the top line ones, just the big ones. The welfare that big corporations are getting is costing you and me, the average family in America, we are paying $2,436 a year in our taxes. We're putting that money into our taxes, and that money is recycled to the largest corporations in America, $2,400 a year. And it's going to get worse now that Trump did this giant tax cut. Anyhow, we'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Scott in Canaan, Maine. Hey, Scott, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
How you doing today, Tom?
Good.
I don't know really how to start this because you hit on so many points, and they're all good points, but you bounce from point to point to point. You won't stay on one. So
sorry
I
about
guess
that.
the best way to do it is with the corporations and what you were just talking about. All these corporations that go over to China know exactly what's over there. You know,
sure.
Not that they're expecting it to be as bad as it really is, but they pretty much know what it is. And the people who are letting them go over there, which is our government, need to smack these people in the head and say, you're either going to be a Chinese corporation or you're going to be an American corporation. And I guess to start with, the problem. To me, it's pretty simple. It's not just the billionaire class that you talk about or the 1%. It's the millionaire class as well, the people who run this government. And I'll be real quick about this and just wait for your answer. Net worth, Lindsey Graham, $471 million.
Really?
Mitch McConnell, $68 million. Paul Ryan, $12 million. Dianne Feinstein, $42 million. Keith Ellison, $7 million. Elizabeth Warren, $10 million. Chuck Schumer, $68 million. Nancy Pelosi, $29 million. You yourself are a $12 million man, which is good.
Me?
You got a lot of good things
I am not.
going.
I'm not worth 12. Where are you getting these numbers from, Scott? And where did Lindsey Graham get all that money?
My own senator, Susan Collins, $32 million.
Yeah, Scott, I'm going to stop this right now because I know that no, I'm sorry. This is not, I don't believe it. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. About an hour ago, a lady called into the show with some shocking details in regards to privatization of healthcare and transportation in the military that I was not aware of. And that brought to mind what's going on, I guess, across the United States. Here in Texas, for example, families typically pay around $17 in order to talk on the phone to their loved ones in prison. And the lady who's an attorney, who's married to that immigration rights activist in New York who was detained recently, and they transported him to Florida for a few days, she said that she had to pay several $100s in order to speak on the phone to him. So my question for you is, perhaps in the next week or two, you might interview some people that know about how this practice got started, who pockets all this money, and what can be done legally or otherwise?
The way it works, Johnny, is in most states, or in many states, I don't know if this is all across the United States, but in many states they have privatized the phone service out of the prisons, and it's a profit center for private phone companies that handle all the billing and the charges, and they toss a kickback to the prison. And that's what's going on. And it's wrong. It's criminal, in my opinion. It should be banned. But hey, this was part of the whole Reagan agenda, is privatize everything, and they privatized the phones in the prisons.
So, whose idea was this? And was there no there was no pushback at the time? I
don't know the history of that. Maya Shenwar would be a good one for that. She wrote a book on this. She's got a sister in prison. I'll have to, the next time we have her on, I'll ask her about it. But Johnny, I don't know the details. I'm sorry. It should be easy to find. Thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news.
Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us
raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Kelly in Lancaster, California. Hey, Kelly, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I have to update, or you have to update your date. Oh, I guess you're running off my phone number. I'm in Colorado now.
Oh, you are? Okay. Yeah, the next time you call in, just let Arthur know or whoever answers the phone, and they'll update the database.
Yeah, I was so many things, and just sitting and listening to you, so many things I want to say. I was calling on the Bears Ears story, and I'm on about a 20-minute delay here on Sirius, so it wasn't quite that long ago.
No, it's fine. Anything we talked about today is fair game. What's up?
Yeah, but everything else you were talking about in the meantime,
yeah.
I feel like a frog in a pot of water on a stove where the heat just keeps, slowly turned up, and I never realized the time to jump out before, I die.
Yeah, you are describing our situation right now really, really well, Kelly.
At what point do we stand up, if we truly are in the majority in this country, at what point do we stand up and say enough is enough? I mean, the list of impeachable offenses that you went off the other day, the corporate, the Bears Ears, I mean, some days I can't even listen to you because it's just too depressing.
I'm sorry.
How do we mobilize? How do we stop this? This is our country.
Yeah, my recommendation is twofold. Number one, get registered to vote and make sure that everybody you know is registered to vote. Number two, ask yourself, what is my particular passion that intersects with politics? Is it the environment? Is it women's rights? Is it minority rights? Is it immigrant rights? Is it science? Is it is it good governance? What is my particular passion? And when you get some kind of a handle on that, look for a good nonprofit group that's doing that kind of work and just throw yourself into it. If we all did this in our own areas of expertise or enthusiasm or passion, we could make tremendous changes in this country. But as Bernie used to say, despair is not an option.
No, you're right. You're right. But I do. Some days, a lot of days, I feel like the frog in the pot of water, and the heat's just going up, and I don't realize it.
Yeah. I got to tell you, Kelly, too, the other thing, from psychology, one of the most effective ways to deal with depression and anxiety is to get active, is to throw yourself into something that you care about. In fact, this is a major therapeutic step for a lot of people. And they don't even realize it. You know, they go to the doctor and they say, I'm depressed, you know, or the shrink, and they say, I'm depressed. I don't know. Well, you know, is there anything you really care about? And you're like, well, not really. Well, that's why you're depressed. So, you know, don't just freak out. Get into it.
No, yeah, granted, you know, and more involvement is needed on many, many, many levels.
I'm sure.
But it doesn't feel like I can do anything. I vote. I take people to the polls to vote. I mean, I try to do my part, and then they steal elections, and they, you know, the voter suppression, and they steal it, and I just feel like I'm fighting a losing battle. But I appreciate your optimism every day, and I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Thank you, Kelly. One last assignment that I would suggest is if you find this show to be of value and the other programs on the Progress Channel on Sirius XM, which you're listening to right now, or for our people listening in other venues, you know, our show is in a lot of different places. Go out of your way to every month, let's say, inform three people that you know, to turn them on to Sirius XM's Progress Channel or Free Speech TV or whatever, the local radio station that I'm on, whatever it may be. Let them know about this. And, you know, not just my show, the lineup and the other shows and things where, because, you know, right. And let's build this progressive media infrastructure. Let's strengthen the progressive media infrastructure. Let's get more people involved. You know, according to Talkers Magazine, we have 6.5 million listeners in an average month on just on the radio. That doesn't include our TV audience. So, you know, if even 10% of that audience was to inform three people, you've got, you know, you're bringing another 1 million people into the mix. I mean, you know, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I will just say I try to do that. In fact, just the other day, just last week, I was at the laundromat and I was talking with a woman there, a couple there who were in the military, and they were Trump supporters. And I just encouraged them, and they actually had Sirius Satellite Radio. And I just said, turn on Thom Hartmann, give him 1 hour, 3 days a week. I mean, you don't always hit, you know, the right hour of Thom Hartmann, but I said, just try it. Just try it. So I do that.
Yeah. And tell them to call in. I love it. You know, when conservatives call in, they go to the top of the line. If somebody wants to disagree with me, though, you know, I love those conversations. And you know, so, you know, tell them, hey, if you are certain that your Trump-loving conservative ideology, although I think those two words are inconsistent with each other, but nonetheless, if you're certain that you've got it right, why don't you try and convince Hartmann? He'll take your call, because I will.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on it, but I appreciate your optimism and your enthusiasm and getting the word out, and I'll listen to you as often as I can.
Thanks, Kelly. You know, things never stay the same, and you know, what's the old saying? Luck is when opportunity meets preparation. So we need to be prepared for when the opportunity comes, which would be like Election Day, to change things. And that's pretty simple, straightforward stuff that everybody can do. Kelly, thanks so much for the call and for your kind words. Yeah, good talking with you. We'll be back with more of the program, more of the news of the day, your calls, and my thoughts on all of the above in just a few moments.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Stick around. We'll be right back. We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book. And it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here is why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy. And those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In other books and places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons in salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I describe Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think that to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil." In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat of a military allied with the plutocracy within, and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, "Though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come. when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy, which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world. So to finish up my rant from earlier, where I was going off on how the average American family, all 115 million of us, each American family is kicking $2,400 a year into the pot to pay for corporate welfare, and about $60 a year to pay for human welfare. Okay, that's just, you know, this is like Forbes, right? Just basic stuff. What does that get us? All that corporate welfare and that little bit of human welfare, what does that get us? In Canada, everybody has health insurance. You can go to college for basically free. All across Europe, everybody has health insurance. You can go to college for basically free. In the United States, half of all bankruptcies are the result of somebody getting sick. But it's even worse than that. According to the CDC, over 23,000 infants died in the United States in 2015, the last year that we have numbers for. This gives the U.S. the worst rate of maternal deaths in the developed world. There are 34 countries in the OECD, the Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development, the 34 richest nations in the world. We're at the bottom of that list. You say you're pro-life? Ha! We are at the bottom of that list. 23,000 infants died in 2015. The U.S. has the worst maternal, and black women in America are 3 times more likely to die during childbirth than white women. An American woman giving birth is 300% more likely to die than a Canadian woman, 600% more likely to die than a Scandinavian woman, 6 times more likely to die. The CDC says nearly 60% of all these maternal deaths were completely preventable if people simply had access to health care. The Affordable Care Act gave 13 million women access to maternity services, but, you know, the Republicans want to take that away. So we have 41 million Americans living in poverty, while the top 1% of Americans control 38% of our wealth. 1 military veteran dies by suicide every 65 minutes in this country. Fewer than half of the reported 22 million U.S. veterans receive health care through the Veterans Administration. Fewer than half. Instead, where do they get their health care? Medicaid, except in those states run by Republicans that have not expanded Medicare, where the veterans are just SOL. And if Medicaid expansions ended, 340,000 veterans would lose their coverage in 2020. Paul Ryan says, oh, we need to reduce spending by cutting Medicare and Medicaid. We can't afford it. We had to give that $1.5 trillion to the billionaires. In Texas in 2015, after they basically outlawed abortion, the entire state has, I think they're down to 1 abortion clinic, maybe 2, 250,000, 240,000 women attempted self-induced abortions. The last time we saw these kind of numbers, you know, prior to Roe v. Wade, it was on average in Texas, 2,700 women a year were dying from complications from unsafe abortions. The U.S. ranks 38th in math in the world. We're not even in the OECD in math. 24th in science, but we're number 1 for the number of people we have in prison. 1/3 of the world's mass shootings happen in the United States. We are less than 5% of the world's population. We have over 33% of the world's mass shootings. In 2017, 987 Americans were shot and killed by police officers. We rank 45th in literacy. Our children are going to school in schools without heat. An entire town still doesn't have clean drinking water, Flint, Michigan. 1/3 of Americans in Puerto Rico still don't have power. This is from Danielle Campoamor over at Newsweek. This is where everything that I just shared with you came from. This is our country. Can't we do something about this? Larry in Madisonville, Kentucky, you want to do something about this? It says here you're a Trump supporter. You want to argue with me. What's up?
Oh, I'm not arguing. I don't argue that much.
Okay.
I'm
Let's talk then.
Pro-Cole, pro-Trump. I flip through. I watch you on Free Speech TV, on Direct TV. I flip through, and I usually watch as long as I can tolerate it, and then I turn it. I'm being honest.
No, that's fine. I'm the same way with Fox News. I'll watch it for 10, 15 minutes, and then my head explodes, and I've got to change the channel. I get what you're talking about, Larry.
I just don't see all this that much gloom and Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, I think they ought to they need to get rid of them. I just
why?
I don't see where they come from. I don't. And
well, can we?
I was telling the,
rather than the broad brush stuff or the character assassination stuff. I mean, I'm not going to make snarky remarks about Trump as a way to win a debating point with you or whatever. But let's talk about the actual issues. What are the issues that concern you, Larry, and where the Republicans are doing what you think is a good thing?
I think the Republicans are doing a good. I think we're on the way to doing a whole lot better.
Well, the economy, the economy right now, we have more people out of the labor force than we even had during Obama. So the labor force participation rate is lower than it was during the Obama presidency. The numbers that Trump, you'll notice in the State of the Union address, a lot of the numbers that Trump quoted, he didn't say these were the best ever, because they're not the best ever. Many of the indexes most of the indexes of the economy were better under Obama than they are now. The stock market continues to climb, but that's because all these big companies got $1.5 trillion, and they're using it to buy back their shares, which jacks their stock price without adding a penny to the productivity of America and without adding a single employee. It's simply manipulating money. And so that's a lousy metric. I mean, what is it that the Republicans are doing that you like?
My 401k and profit sharing has done a whole lot better.
Right, and it did for 7 years under Obama, too. Trump has not changed any policies that have to do with the economy that I can see other than this giant tax cut, which I think is going to destroy our economy.
And I think coal, I know they're going to eventually fade it all out, but I live in West Kentucky, and we have 200 years of coal still unmined.
Sure. But it's being phased out not by me and green power in Kentucky. It's being phased out by natural gas. You know that, Larry.
Yes, I know. Yeah, and we got plenty of that because I've seen several mines explode.
Yeah, there you go. But what are the things that I mean? Can't we?
Just when I hear Pelosi or Schumer get up there and talk, it's just like hearing somebody from another planet.
Yeah, well, you're not hearing them talk on this program. Education. Do you think that everybody in the country ought to be able to go to school?
Oh yeah. To
college for free?
I didn't get to go to college.
But don't you think
it was a coal miner?
But if you
go ahead, I'm sorry.
If you had grown up instead of in Kentucky in California, I'm not sure how old you are, Larry, but prior to Ronald Reagan, college was absolutely free in California. In fact, it was free in a lot of places around the country, City College in New York and other places. Isn't that a decent thing to do, to say, or healthcare? Shouldn't healthcare be considered a human right like every other developed country in the world does?
Yes, in Kentucky we expanded Medicaid. In Kentucky,
But Matt Bevins is blowing it up.
Yeah, he is.
Your new Republican governor.
He's cutting. Yeah, I know, and he's cutting a lot of programs out.
So how can you agree with that?
I don't agree with that. I don't. My stepdaughter's got a traumatic brain injury from a car accident, and he's cutting stuff that benefits her, that keeps her.
So how can you vote for a Republican, Larry?
I didn't vote for. I didn't vote for him.
Yeah.
So
those are a couple of my top issues. What do you see that you would like? What are the Democrats proposing that you disagree with?
Just the way they. It just seems like everything on the Trump side. It just seems like they bash it and.
Well, we're talking. When you say everything, I can't answer that, Larry. What specifically?
Oh, I know. I'm nervous. This is the first time I've ever been on TV.
I understand. No problem.
I'm having trouble.
No problem. Well, Larry, why don't we pause this right here, because we've been talking for about 5 minutes, and we'll get some other callers in, and give me a call next week, and think about it. Watch your Fox News and come up with some points you'd like to discuss with me, and I'd be glad to talk to you about it. You're a decent guy.
You're on. I flip back and forth from Fox to you, and then I tolerate each of them as much as I can.
Okay, Larry, thanks for the call. It's good talking with you.
Thank you.
It's good, and it's nice for us to treat each other like human beings. It really is a good thing. Warren in Missouri City, Texas. Hey, Warren, what's on your mind today?
Oh, thank you, Tom. Normally I call in, you let me rant about science and ignorance, but today I want to bring some good news from Missouri City, the home of, oh, now I'm drawing a blank. Well, it's Republican headquarters down here.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a rally Saturday afternoon for Beto O'Rourke, and while we were there, got trapped in the hallway for about 30 minutes because this is a libertarian country, so they overbooked the room that we were supposed to be using, so we had to stand in the hall for a long time. And I got to meet a new guy named Sharif Preston, who's running against Pete Olson down here. And when we got into the room, both Olson and O'Rourke had a bunch of campaign staffers with them, very young people, people of different colors. It was great. And we got in the room, they talked about how the Fort Bend County Democratic Party is trying to make sure that we have somebody running in every office for everything in this area.
That's what we need to do, from dog catcher to senator.
Exactly. And I can tell you from voting for the last, since I moved here, you got to look hard to find the Democrats. There's not a whole bunch of them on the ballots in the past, but these guys all look like great guys. They sound almost like Bernie Sanders.
That's great.
It is awesome.
Yeah, well, Bernie woke this country up, and Trump is slapping us in the face right now. So, Warren, thank you for the call. That's good news from Missouri City, Texas. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. John in Long Beach, Mississippi. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I want to thank you very much for allowing me to have a voice on your program. I think it's great, and I appreciate everything you're talking about. I'm not very politically equipped. I'm a little ignorant in many ways, but here's my my point in terms of money being taken out of our politics and out of our political arena. First, I think that term limits should be addressed, and they're not. And then, of course, you put a cap on the salary of people who are going into a political, holding a political position and not allowing that to be exercised according to the benefit of the cooperative world. And then I think that restricting the lobbyists who become lobbyists after they have held a position as a political held a political position, there should be some kind of something set up to so we can monitor that as well.
John,
and then, of course, one other thing, and then I wanted to say in solidarity.
No. If I may interrupt you, John, and then you can get to your other things. Term limits are a bad idea, and the reason why has to do with your lobbyist thing. What happens? Think of John, if you had been elected to Congress or to the state legislature in Mississippi. And you show up there, and you just got elected, and you show up and you say, I don't know how this thing works. Who do I talk to? Where do I go? How does legislation happen? How do I train my staff? Where are the levers, basically? And typically what would happen is a member of your own party who has been there for a while, in fact, the longer the better, would sit you down and say, here's how it works. Here's what you do. Here's where you go. In other words, they would convey to you the institutional knowledge of the Mississippi legislature. They would tell you how to be effective, how to be successful, how to make things work. Now, that's what happens without term limits. If you term limit everybody, you come in there and you're looking around going, what the heck? What do I do? I don't know how to do this. And who's going to come up to you? It's going to be a lobbyist. In all probability, a lobbyist who used to be a legislator, because those are the best lobbyists from the lobbying company's point of view. And so what has happened is that the power, the institutional power and momentum of the institution of the legislature has been taken away from legislators and handed off to lobbyists. And we've seen this in the half a dozen states or so that have enacted term limits over and over and over again. When you pass term limits, you strengthen the lobbyists and you weaken the political parties.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
Well,
you had other points you wanted to make, John?
Yes, I'm looking at the idea of restricting these lobbyists who have been politicians before. I'm thinking that might be a way of
stop the revolving door. I'm totally up with that.
Yeah, and then my other point was putting a cap on salaries. I think whenever I hear about a politician who goes into an office making X amount of dollars and comes out making a little more, I think that's kind of disgusting.
Well, we've seen legislators who go to Congress broke, and they come out of Congress worth multi-millions. And,
that's what I'm talking about.
As the caller earlier was alluding to, all those numbers were BS. But, that's not from their salary. That's from doing stuff on the side, typically with lobbyists. And that's what we need to put an end to. Yeah, we need to put an end to it. But you want to pay them enough that people will actually want to go into politics. If you got elected in Mississippi and you had to commute to Washington, D.C. every week, you want to have a reasonable pay. And I think it's at that right now. Anyhow, John, thanks for the call. It's good talking with you, and thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news.
Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them
we join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us
raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Teresa in Lewistown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's up?
Well, about an hour or so ago, there was a woman from Ohio that had called in concerning fair districting in her state.
Mm-hmm.
And I myself am the chairman of the local county Democratic Party. And
good on you, Teresa.
Yes. And I have also run for county treasurer and lost, but then I ran for county auditor and won. So there you go.
Hey, good on you. That's great.
But what I wanted to call about is to let you know, I don't know if you knew about it or heard about it or if your audience has, but in Pennsylvania, we did actually win at our Pennsylvania Supreme Court about redistricting the congressional maps. And the state court, the Supreme Court, told our General Assembly that they were to redraw our maps by February 4th. But if they don't, then the court is going to step in and do it for them.
Right.
However, the Republicans that control our General Assembly have notified the court they are not going to be complying. And they have also asked the United Supreme Court to step in and put a hold on this order.
Right. And I'm assuming that even if the court does the redistricting, it won't do it as fast as it could be done by a legislature. I mean, the courts just don't have those kind of resources. So it could take years.
What the court has asked for is they want the information, the maps, and the data that the General Assembly has used before to create these district lines.
Mm-hmm.
And they have hired or retained a professor out of Stanford Law to help them redraw these maps.
Oh, that's great.
According to Pennsylvania Governor Wolf, they were going to use science and math.
Oh, that'll horrify the Republicans. Science and math? Are you kidding?
Well, so what they're saying is, number one, that the General Assembly is saying, well, we don't understand why the court thinks this is unconstitutional to our state's constitution, and the court has not given us parameters as to what's wrong with our maps and how should we draw them.
Right.
That's number one. And number two, they're claiming that because our state Supreme Court has asked for data in advance so that they can prepare maps in the event that they don't pass any. They're saying that's their way of preempting or trying to usurp the power of our General Assembly, whose duty it is constitutionally to make the maps. And so they're saying that because of those reasons, they're not going to comply.
Yeah, that's pretty weak tea, you know.
Well, and what's happening is our petition signing for the congressional for our primary begins February 13th, ending March 9th, 6th. Right now, that's all on hold. We can't get petitions together. We can't have them signed, you know, and all of that is up in the air. So that's what we're dealing with here in Pennsylvania. So, you know, we won. Well, and thankfully we do have six Democrats on the Supreme Court out of 8, I believe. And only one of the Democrats sided with the Republicans, so it was a 5-3 vote. So
that's
good. Where we are.
Well, thank you for the update, Teresa.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Problem.
Thank you very much. And thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Maine in Chicago. Hey, Maine, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
I just wanted to say about, you know, we have to democratize our democracy. You know, we need candidates now that have a people's agenda and issues, and not that of capitalists. Capitalism, you know, has made it where it's capitalism first and democracy second. We have to make it where it's democracy first and capitalism second.
I agree.
Right, and that's why. Oh, that's why I was talking about earlier about a People's Party, like they had a Tea Parties to push the Republicans like where they wanted them to go. We need a People's Party to push these.
But look at Maine. Look at what the Tea Party did. They infiltrated and took over the Republican Party. There's no Tea Party anymore. It's now the GOP.
Right, and that's another thing. And so the people, we have to have people to rise up. We start out as a People's Party, and then and infiltrate the Democratic Party, so that now we'll have actual people who are doing people's issues and agendas.
Yep, I think that process is already in place, Maine. I mean, that's what's happening. Look at how many you know, politicians are adopting progressive perspectives. You know that we should have, you know, safe drugs. We should have clean food. We should have decent wages for people. We should have you know, a social safety net that catches people. Everybody should have access to health care in the country. Everybody should have access to education. I mean, they've gone from being, oh, that's wild liberal stuff, to, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And why can't we do that? Canada does that. You know, all of Europe does that. Why can't we do that? Are we the you know, the dumb whatever stepchild or whatever the old phrase is? No, you know, we are capable of. Maine, thanks so much for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. Thanks for listening to WCPT. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you so much for caring about our republic, for caring about the democracy in our republic, for our, you know, a vital political future for this country. Thank you. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, as both Bernie Sanders and President Obama said frequently. It requires all of us. So it was so cool to hear from the woman who's, you know, actually run for political office and got there. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.